Hello everyone, how are you all? I hope everything going great and amazing. Welcome to this 100% English session of amendments for May 2026 examination. Before we start with the amendments, ma'am, what is the cutoff date? As in, if we are appearing in May 2026 examination, amendments till which date will be applicable to us? So the cutoff date for your exam is 31st October 2025. So all the amendments that have come up to this date, 31st October 25, are applicable for your May 2026 examination. For this, version 8 of the handwritten notes is applicable. So if you are studying from version 8 of our handwritten notes, then all the amendments that have come in GST are compiled in your book. You don't have to see any other extra thing. For customs, only at two places amendments have been missed out in version 8 because the startup date was not released by the time we released our books. So only for that customs part, one page, and FTP part, just one small paragraph. This is only extra that you have to see if you are referring to version 8. But if you are referring to version 7 of the notes, then this entire video is relevant for you. All these changes you have to mark at relevant places. Ma'am, what if I'm using version 6 of the book? In that case, one change you have to make in ISD topic, input service distributor, for which you will have to refer the video as well as PDF of changes from version 6 to 7. And plus additionally, you will also have to see this PDF and video which is for changes from version 7 to 8. So two things you have to compile. Ma'am, what if I'm using version 5 or any older version? Then the changes are huge. It's not possible for you to actually make so many changes at a lot of places. So I would advise you going for the new book. Ma'am, new book, from where can I get it? The hard copy of handwritten notes you can get from the fast.edu.in, which is the fast education website. Ma'am, what about question bank? A similar PDF for all the changes that have come in question bank compared to version 7 to 8 are shared on Telegram, full compiled PDF. For question bank, I would advise that if you are using version 6 or any older version, you should go for a new question bank. Again, the hard copy is available on FAST website, but I understand every attempt purchasing new question bank is practically not feasible, but it becomes also important because every attempt, so many new questions added for RTP, MTP, past paper, ICI make changes in their test your knowledge questions. We have to remove some repetitive irrelevant questions just to maintain the volume of question bank. So making so many changes would not be possible for you. Therefore, I have shared full version 8, the latest amended question bank for May 2026. Full version 8 of question bank have been shared in a PDF format on FAST website. In the download section, you can go download and take a printout. If you want hard copy, you can purchase also, but printable PDF is also available. The printable PDF of handwritten notes is not available. If you are using version 6 or 7, you can make changes from this PDF. Any older version, you'll have to go and purchase a new book. Right, ma'am. So this PDF compiles all the additions, deletions, changes from version 7 to 8 of handwritten notes. If you are already having version 8, then you don't have to make any change except for the change in customs. GST, everything fully amended. Customs also, there is just one page that you have to do. It is available on FAST website. It's fully amended for May 26 and contains all the relevant changes. In this PDF, wherever green, you see the green fonts, it all notifies, signifies amendment. Now, because I have amended, I've compiled only the amendments here. So, of course, you'll be seeing everything green only. These page numbers that I have mentioned are from version 6 and 7 of the book. So, if you are already using version 6 or 7, you can go to the relevant page number and make these changes or additions as and when required as per this video and PDF. Right, ma'am. So are we all ready to quickly finish up all the amendments? It is not much, hardly 1.5 hours. We'll be covering all the amendments, and we understand this becomes very important because usually as per trend, at least 10 to 15 marks we see in examination from amendments only. So be attentive, be active, and finish it up. Finish it off one for all with me. Right, ma'am. We start with important terms. So there is no amendment or no change as such. One new definition you have to add in your book in important terms part, page number 14. Right, ma'am? And it is about goods transport agency. See, the definition of GTA in law was already there. But there is a small change in it. So first we understand, ma'am, we already knew that a person who is transporting goods via road issuing consignment notes is known as a GTA, Goods Transport Agency. We used to study this in charge of GST chapter any which ways. Now we are adding it in the important terms part because of this amendment, which says that generally anyone who is doing transportation of goods by road, this is important, right? If you are doing transportation via air or rail or water, you are not GTA. Only a person doing transportation services via road will be considered as GTA. Plus you will have to issue consignment notes also. Ma'am, a lorry owner, a individual truck owner or a van owner might also do transportation via road, but they are all not GTA because they do not issue consignment notes. So for you to be recognized as a GTA, you need to issue consignment note plus you need to make transportation via road. This was already there. Now the amended part says that, but it will not include e-commerce operators through whom you are taking local delivery services. Ma'am, nowadays it has become so common to use this Swiggy, Genie, Porter or Instamart, Zepto, Blinkit, and you can make small delivery services from these e-commerce operator apps also. Government has specifically mentioned this in the definition of GTA that these e-commerce operators like Zepto or Blinkit or Porter or Swiggy, Genie making these local delivery services, they will not be covered in the definition of GTA. Meaning, ma'am, we study a lot of RCM and exemption related provisions for GTA. All those provisions will not be applicable on the e-commerce operator. E-commerce operator continues to be governed under the normal section 9(5) and TCS transactions, though they provide delivery services through road, but they are not issuing consignment notes and they are not GTAs. GTAs will be treated separately and the e-commerce operator doing such local delivery services will be treated separately is what the crux is. Right, ma'am. Then moving on to next topic, which is supply under GST. Now in supply under GST chapter, there is only one change, which is there in the schedule 3. Ma'am, what was schedule 3 under supply under GST chapter? So schedule 3 was the negative list, a list of goods or services which might be goods services, but still government has explicitly said that we do not want to consider it as supply. We do not want to levy GST on the same. We have already learnt the list of negative list as FB changes. Services of funeral, mortuary, burial, crematorium, including transportation of deceased, bond-to-bond transfer, court, tribunal, ceding commission, co-insurance, high sea sale, actionable claim, one non-taxable territory to another non-taxable territory without entering into India, government, employer, employee, and sale of completed land and building. So this FB changes we have already learnt. Now plus there is one new entry from S which you have to insert in the FB changes part. This says that supply of goods warehoused in a special economic zone or in a free trade warehousing zone to any person before clearance for export or DTA, domestic tariff area. So we are saying, let's say your goods are warehoused in a special economic zone or in a free trade warehousing zone. You are not yet exporting it. You are not yet clearing it in the domestic tariff area. From this SEZ only, you are supplying the goods to someone. In this free trade zone only, you are supplying the goods to someone. In that case, GST will not be applicable. It is very similar to the bond-to-bond transfer, right? So in bond-to-bond transfer, we see that if the goods are lying in the customs bonded warehouse and before clearing, I sell it there and there only to someone, GST will not be applicable. Similar provision is applicable for this particular part also, that from SEZ only, if I supply the goods to SEZ, another unit, let us say I'm transferring from the free trade warehousing zone to another free trade warehousing zone, something like that, I am neither exporting it nor clearing it in the domestic tariff area. In that area only, if I am dealing with the goods, then GST will not be applicable because ma'am, from there if you export, anyways you get GST benefits, and from there if you are clearing in DTA, then at that point of time you will be required to pay GST. No GST when the goods are being sold from this SEZ or free trade zone within that particular zone only. That is also now covered under Schedule 3 negative list. Right, ma'am, done. Then moving on to next chapter, which is charge of GST. Now, ma'am, in charge of GST, amendment is there in the topic of section 9.5. So there is no amendment, no change in the RCM part. So section 9.3, 9.4, whatever RCM we have studied, everything remains same. Section 9.5 amendment is there. 9.5 is about e-commerce operator. So we had studied some hater services, or as we call them, hatre in Hindi. So it was, ma'am, housekeeping, accommodation, transportation and restaurant services. We had studied about these 4 services, ma'am, that neither supplier nor recipient will be liable. We'll call the e-commerce operator to collect tax and pay to government. But ma'am, for housekeeping and accommodation, if original supplier is liable, then ECO will not step in under 9.5. The supplier itself will be liable to collect and pay GST to government. But ma'am, for transportation and restaurant we had studied, forget whether the original supplier is liable or not, always ECO will only be liable to collect and pay tax to government. For transportation, there was one exception of company omnibus. For restaurant, there was one exception of the specified premise. Right, ma'am. So, other than this, always ECO will be liable to collect and pay tax. This we have already studied in section 9.5 about the 4 services where ECO will be liable. Now, one new service have been added here, which is the local delivery services. So like this Instamart and all, when you are taking local delivery services from e-commerce operator, we are saying neither the supplier from where you are purchasing nor the recipient to whom it is being supplied, the ECO who is providing these local delivery services will be liable to collect and pay tax to government. But it falls in the category of housekeeping and accommodation only. Meaning, ma'am, here we are saying just like housekeeping or accommodation, if the original supplier is liable, we will not make the e-commerce operator liable. No 9.5 will apply. But if the original supplier is unregistered, not collecting GST, not liable for registration under GST, in that case we are saying, ma'am, government is not going to leave the tax because we do have an ECO involved in the transaction. Forget supplier, even if he is not registered, we can tell the e-commerce operator to collect tax and pay to government. So you have to add this local delivery with the housekeeping and accommodation block, where 9.5 applies only if the supplier is not liable. In transportation and restaurant, always ECO liable, always 9.5 applies, whether supplier is registered or not. But now for these 3 services, which is housekeeping, accommodation and local delivery services, we are saying ECO will be liable only if the original supplier is not liable. Right. Is it clear to everyone? Say yes, ma'am. So we remember it as a supplier, hatre, a recipient, hatre, low e-commerce operator, G come, you collect and pay tax to government. So you have to add this low with the HA part. So local delivery, housekeeping and accommodation. All these 3 people, if supplier is liable, registered, 9.5 not applicable, ECO will not step in between. But if supplier is unregistered, not liable for registration, then ECO will be collecting tax and paying to government. However, for transportation and restaurant, always ECO will be liable other than the one exception of omnibus and specified premise. Right, ma'am. This is the only change in charge of GST. You just have to add this one small point of local delivery services. That's all. Then there is no change in composition levy part. There is no change in registration. A very small one amendment in tax invoice credit and debit note. Now, as such, this amendment is just with respect to more clarity in law and language. This is nothing new. No new topic or no new understanding that you have to develop. You already know this part that has been inserted here. Right. But before we move on to the amendment part, I'm asking you one simple question. Tell me. In tax invoice credit and debit note chapter, we study section 34, which is related to credit note and debit note, where there is a last date involved. When is government not happy, or let's say less happy, when you're issuing credit notes or debit notes? Tell me. Ma'am, credit notes, right? Because when we issue credit note, we reduce our outward payable. So government has to reduce our GST liability. Of course, they will not be happy. Ma'am, if I had originally made a sales of 100 and now I am saying there is a sale return of 20, I am issuing a credit note for 20, meaning ma'am, whatever will be my this month current liability, I will be reducing 20 from it and then paying the taxes to government. So because I am reducing my outward liability, of course, government is not happy or less happy. Therefore, they have kept a last date also to issue credit note and show it in the returns, which is 30 November or actual date of filing annual return, whichever is earlier. Till this date only if you do, they will allow you to reduce your outward liability. After this date, you can still issue commercial credit notes to set off your transaction with the recipient. But in that case, you will not be allowed to reduce your outward GST payable. Right, ma'am. This we already know. So, ma'am, first part we are saying that no GST credit note in case of secondary discounts. We know that, ma'am, if the discounts are secondary, the time limit has been crossed or this was not agreed in prior all these situations, ma'am, we are still allowed to give discounts. We are still allowed to issue credit notes, but those will be secondary nature of commercial credit notes. You will not get any GST liability reduction when issuing such commercial credit notes. Right, ma'am. If you have already passed on the burden of this tax on your recipient, and if you are given this reduction in output liability, there will be unjust enrichment. Then also, you will not be allowed to reduce your outward liability. Say for example, ma'am, I sold something for 100 to a small student. Let's say this is a small kid, a small student came to a stationery shop, purchased 100 rupees worth of items. Actual GST applicable on this should have been 18%. Mistakenly, let us say I levied 28%. Now the student is gone. The customer is gone. Ma'am, even if I realize that I have collected 10 rupees of extra GST, there is no possibility that I can find this person and return this money back. Meaning, ma'am, even if I decide to issue a credit note of this 10 and government gives me the reduction in output liability for 10 rupees, will it be fair on my part? No, ma'am, because I have collected full 28 from the customer. I have to pay full 28 to government. Now, if I collect 28 from the customer, pay 28 to government and then take 10 back, I am unjustly enriched by rupees 10. No, this 10 should ideally go to this customer. But we are unable to find the customer. He was an unregistered small kid, came, purchased and went. So, ma'am, because I cannot identify the person to whom the burden has been passed and I have already passed on the burden. Now I cannot issue this credit notes. I cannot reduce my outward payable by 10. I will have to pay full 28 to government, because if government gives me this 10 back in the form of reduction of liability, I will be unjustly enriched. I collected 28 from that person. I am taking 10 from government. No, that is not fair as such. So this is nothing new that I have taught, right? Till here, everything is same. It is not in green. I was just giving you a context, a background of things that we have already studied. Right, ma'am. Now, the amendment part says that if you had supplied to a registered person and now you are issuing credit notes, you want to reduce your outward liability payable. In that case, your recipient also has to reverse the equal amount of ITC. Now, this is nothing new. We already know this. How and why, ma'am? We have studied value of supply chapter. Right, ma'am. In value of supply, we have studied section 15.3 related to discount, which says that if at any point of time you are giving post-supply discounts, there are 3 conditions which you need to satisfy. There should be a prior agreement. The discount should be linked to invoice. And the third point, the proportionate ITC has to be reversed by the recipient. Proportionate ITC has to be reversed by the recipient. Only then you are allowed to issue such GST credit notes and reduce your outward liability, reduce your value of supply. So this condition was already there in section 15.3. It is already there in section 15.3. We have already studied. So even without reading this clarification being inserted by government here to make the provisions of credit note more simple, we already knew this. right? We have studied this, that if I am supplying to a registered person, I originally supplied for 100. I collected GST on 100, paid to government. My recipient took ITC on 100, the matter was closed. Later, we realized that there was some mistake or there are some goods returned, something like this is happening. So, we decide to issue a credit note of 20. Now, if I want to reduce my liability by GST on 20, of course, for me, if it is sale return, for recipient, it is purchase return. So, the recipient also should reverse the equal amount of ITC here. Only then, if recipient reverses the ITC, government can allow me to reduce my outward liability payable. So, this condition we already knew. We have studied it at a different place in value of supply. But now via an amendment, government has inserted this point in the credit note part also to make this also more clear. So it is just about more clarity in law. No new provision that has been inserted. This provision was already there in another section. Via a clarification, they have issued it here also. So there is a no scope of any error. So we are saying that we will not allow you to reduce your output liability. No reduction in output tax liability if ITC attributable to such credit note has not been reversed by a recipient being a registered person. So if you want your outward liability to be reduced, your recipient being registered person has to reduce the equal amount of ITC also. Right, ma'am? Done. For unregistered, because they don't take ITC only, so that's not a question. Of course, reversal of ITC point will come for a registered recipient only. Done. Clear? Understood, everyone? Yes, ma'am. Moving on to next topic, which is time of supply. Very simple amendment, section 12.4, which was about time of supply for vouchers, goods related, and 13.4, which was time of supply for vouchers, service related. These two sections have been omitted, removed. Why, ma'am? Because last attempt there was an amendment. We have also studied a clarification specifically with respect to vouchers, right? Yes, ma'am. That vouchers, if recognized by RBI, are either money, or if not recognized, they are still actionable claims, because I can and use the voucher against some specific goods or services. So it is either actionable claim or money. Both which ways, they are not covered in the purview of GST, because money is neither goods nor services. Actionable claim also falls in the negative list. So because GST is not applicable only on these vouchers, why is there even a need to find the time of supply for the same? So therefore, the time of supply related provisions for vouchers have been omitted because they are no more relevant now. Ma'am, the voucher is not taxable, but when you go redeem the voucher against some specific goods or services, then these goods or services are taxable, and accordingly the time of supply for these goods or services we will be calculating, and not the time of supply of the voucher. Right, ma'am. So do not mistake it like, ma'am, if I have a voucher, I redeem it and I take some goods or services, there is no GST. It is not like that. On the trading of voucher, there is no GST. Therefore, time of supply for voucher has been removed. But ma'am, when I redeem the voucher and I get some goods or services, they are normally taxable. So the time of supply will be calculated according to the time of supply of goods services and not the voucher. So you simply have to omit section 12.4 and 13.4. Done, ma'am. Then there is no change in value of supply, there is no change in place of supply, no change in payment of tax, TDS, TCS, everything remains same. Next amendment is in the chapter of exemptions. Again, happy news for you, there is no change, there is just addition, meaning whatever exemption you know, whatever exemption you have studied till now, everything remains exactly same. Just one new small point has been inserted here with respect to insurance. Right, ma'am? So we do have an insurance block in the exemption chapter where we study about some specific kind of insurances which are exempted. One more point you have to add, which is with respect to life insurance and health insurance. So if you are an individual and you are taking life insurance or you are taking health insurance for yourself or your relatives. Now, ma'am, here who do we consider relatives? Anyone who you consider relative in your insurance contract. Meaning, ma'am, the family that we understand under GST, that spouse and children always related, parents, grandparents, brother, sister related only if they are dependent, that definition is not applicable here. Meaning family or relative here is up to your discretion. Meaning, ma'am, I can consider my cousin brother also as my family. I can consider my masi, my bua, my uncle, my auntie also as my family. It's fine, no problem. Right. So we are saying that the insured person, the person who is taking this life insurance or health insurance, is an individual, or they are taking for individual and his her family. Now they have clarified that whomever you mention in your insurance contract as your family, it's okay, we'll accept them as your family. And if you are paying premiums for them, you are taking life insurance, health insurance, GST will not be applicable. Plus the reinsurance of such life or health insurance is also exempted under GST. Now there are two important points here which you have to consider. Point number one, only life insurance and only health insurance have been exempted. Ma'am, general insurances are all taxable. Let us say I decide to insure my phone, whatever premium I will be paying, it is taxable. If I insure this water bottle, whatever premium I am paying, it will be taxable. If I am insuring my car, my motor vehicle, whatever premium I am paying, it is going to be taxable. So please make sure that you are writing here specifically only life insurance and health insurance, which are related to us individuals. Those are being exempted, not the general insurances. And point number two, when these insurances, the life and health insurance taken by individual for himself, herself or his, her family, only that is exempted. Let us say, ma'am, a group is taking these insurances. I am an employer. I have 100 workers working in my factory, in my office. I decide to take life insurance for all of them. It is going to be taxable because they are not my relatives. It is a group insurance. Let us say, ma'am, there is a trade union. It decides to take health insurance for all the members of this trade union. Again, it is going to be taxable. So we are saying that when the insured person is a group, it is going to be taxable. The insured person should not be a group to avail this exemption benefit of life and health insurance. So group means a person, a group of people who are joining together with some kind of commonality for some kind of economic interest, then all of these people will be considered as a group. And group may be employer-employee group, non-employer-employee group like trade unions or etc., a club, etc. So these people taking life or health insurance for the entire group will be taxable. But individuals taking life insurance, health insurance for themselves or their relatives, plus their reinsurances, are all going to be exempt under GST. Very, very simple new exemption being introduced. Right, ma'am. Then one more very not important kind of change made in exemption chapter is on the last page of chapter. So you will find this clarification asking that is Delhi Development Authority treated as a local authority? And we already know that no, ma'am. DDA, as in Delhi Development Authority, is not a local authority. So basically all the exemptions that are applicable on a local authority will not be applicable on a Delhi Development Authority. Right, ma'am. Why so? Because we have studied the definition of local authority. And the definition of local authority says that any municipal committee or a Zilla Parishad or district board, basically any authority who is legally entrusted with the control of local fund or municipal fund, those bodies can be considered as local authority. So if you want to be categorized as a local authority, you must be having management control access to the municipal fund or the local fund. In that case, you are a local authority. So the amendment here is in the definition of local authority. They have just introduced this term fund only for more clarity. Earlier it was written that if I am in a control or a management of municipal or local fund, I am a local authority. Now they are saying municipal fund or local fund. That's all. So just this fund word is added. Even when it was not there, we still used to interpret the definition as same only. Whether it is municipal or local fund, or it is municipal fund or local fund, doesn't make that much of a difference. Right, ma'am. But they have made this change specifically because they have introduced the definition of local fund as well as municipal fund. Again, they are both same only. Local fund means a fund which is managed by panchayat, and municipal meaning it is for metropolitan or municipal area. That is the only difference, right? The understanding, the definition, the application, everything is same. We are saying that any kind of a fund, which is under control or management of a local self government established. Ma'am, why would they use these funds? Because they want to discharge the local civic functions there. They want to maintain the cleanliness of the town or village or the city for the drainage system, sewerage system, water related issues, street lights, etc. So there could be a lot of civic functions which these panchayats or municipal areas have to fulfill. And to do this, they need to have some funds. These funds are known as local funds if they are for panchayat area, municipal fund if they are for metropolitan or municipal area. So these panchayat people and the municipal people have the power to levy, collect, appropriate any kind of a tax, duty, toll, cess, fees, whatever name called, these amounts are collected by these people, and this fund lies under the control, under the management of these people. So people controlling these funds are known as local authority, and the funds being controlled by these people are known as local funds for panchayat, and municipal funds for metropolitan or municipal area. So we understand this entire amendment is as such read only category. You just read it once and let go. It is absolutely fine. Done, ma'am. Moving on to next chapter, which is input tax credit. Again, only two small changes. One new clarification have been inserted in ITC chapter, and one small amendment, one small change has been made in section 17.5. Quickly tell me, what is section 17.5? Section 17.5 is about what? Ma'am, section 17.5 is about blocked credits under GST. Right, ma'am. In the blocked credit part, we had one specific point with respect to works contract and construction. That, ma'am, if I am constructing or works contracting any immovable property other than plant or machinery, ITC will be blocked. For plant and machinery, ITC is available. Other than that, ITC for construction as well as works contract on own account, it is going to be blocked. Now, ma'am, only a very small change here in the construction part. It was mentioned as other than plant or machinery. You just have to strike off the word or and you have to write and here. This is the only change. This is the only change. In works contract part, it was written as plant and machine only. In construction, it was written as plant or machine, because of which there was an interpretation issue, because of which the case law of safari retreats happened. But now, because government has amended this and made it same as works contract, which is plant and machine, the case law of safari retreats is now no more relevant. You have to strike off the case law. In this case law, they had taken the benefit of this loophole of or being written. So they said, okay, I am building a warehouse, I am building a mall. It is not machine, but you are mentioning no plant or machine. So I might consider it as plant. No, I am constructing it. Give me ITC because I am going to give this property on rent. This is my only plant which I am going to use for further supply. So give me ITC and all. So government made amendment in the law, and now what they have done is they have written plant and machine at both the places, blocking ITC for all immovable properties other than plant and machine. Right, ma'am? And they are specifically saying that plant and machine is going to exclude any land, building or full civil structure, telecommunication towers or pipeline outside the factory. These are not plant and machine, meaning ITC for construction or works contract of these items is going to be blocked only. They are specifically not plant and machine. Other any plant and machine, if you are constructing, works contracting, ITC is going to be available to you. So you just have to make two small changes here. One, you strike off the safari retreats case law given in the book, and second, here where or is written in the construction part, you just cut or and you write and here. Right, ma'am. Okay. Now, one thing which is not very important or relevant for you as such, but still I'm informing you. What ICAI has done this time in the new modules of May 2026 that they have released. For the test your knowledge questions given in the module, wherever there were these works contract or construction related points, they have removed those points, meaning they have not amended the answer. They have not, see, answer would any which ways not be amended, because earlier also construction works contract was blocked, now also it is blocked only. So answers would still remain same only. But what they did in the module questions, just to remove the ambiguity, they removed those points only. If there is a question for you to practice, you will be getting clarity. But they removed all the questions related to construction works contract except for some one or two questions. They have removed all. They have not changed, not edited, nothing. They have removed only. I'll show you, see. See, if you are using any other question bank, anything like that, make sure that you are at least sure that as per the new modules released by ICAI, your question bank is amended. Not just the RTP, MTP or the past paper, even ICAI keeps making changes in the test your knowledge part of the module. So make sure whatever question bank you are using, it is amended. I'll give you 2-3 places where you will find out that these kind of changes have been made by ICAI and you can match them also. Like, see ma'am, this is a normal test your knowledge question from ICAI book only, which is Siddhi Limited. Earlier also it was the same. Now also if you open the module, prima facie you will see Siddhi Limited question. And you will feel like, okay, this question was there, this is now also there. Your answer of 80,000 also remains same as 80,000. So you might feel that there is no change in the question. Actually, there is no change. They could have kept the question same only. But what ICAI did, in their test your knowledge, they removed this point where it was written this: goods used for setting up telecommunication towers. Point number 4. Point number 4, ma'am, we clearly know telecommunication tower is not plant machine. So ITC for construction works contract should be blocked only. There is as such no ambiguity. But still, they removed this point quietly, removed this point from answer also, and removed this point from the working note also. And change the answer. This is just one example. Not only this question, there are a lot of other questions where only this construction works contract part have been changed by ICAI. Not changed, basically removed only. Right. They have not done it in all questions, but they have done in a lot of questions. I'll show you one more, let us say. This is version 7 only, and the relevant changes I have made and given to the typist to make in version 8. So I'm showing you the raw file here. Right, ma'am. See, this Flowchem question again. This question also contained questions with respect to the pipeline and the telecommunication towers and construction and works contract and all. So ICAI made a lot of changes in the question. You will still find a question named Flowchem in your test your knowledge part of module. But if you meticulously see the question, you'll realize that there are some changes made, some additions, deletions made with respect to this works contract part. See, our understanding, our way of solving is going to be same, because they have just made one change. They have written here and instead of or. And we any which ways before the Safari Retreats case law used to interpret it that ways only. It was just this 1 year time where the case law came, and now the case law is gone again. So our understanding is absolutely same. We can still solve a question on construction works contract. But I'm just trying to inform you this thing, that because ICAI has quietly removed these areas from their test knowledge questions, they might be having some ambiguity and they might not be wanting to ask this in exam or anything like that. So this now becomes little less relevant because they have removed all those points. The points are there in the explanation part of the chapter. Only from the question part, they have removed this. I have still kept, see, whenever these points were asked in RTP, MTP or past paper, I have kept, because we have law, we have answer how to solve. Only in module they have removed. So wherever they themselves have removed, I have removed the same areas from the question bank also. Right. So if you are using version 8 of the question bank, all these things are amended. If you are using version 7, I have given you 7 to 8 changes PDF where all these things are marked. And that's why I'm telling you no to use any version older than 6. Older than 7, basically 6, 5, 4 if you are using, you should go with the new question bank. There's not even a need to purchase. You can download and take a printout, black and white printout, it's absolutely fine for question bank, right ma'am? But these small changes you might overlook, you might not make in book, and you might mess up for these things. That's why I'm telling you to go for a new question bank, right ma'am? Done, chalo. So as such, for us, no understanding is changing. Just remove the Safari Retreats case law, come back to the original provision and cancel or here and write and. That is all. Done, ma'am. Chalo. Moving on to the clarification being inserted by CBIC, which is about secondary or post-sale discount. How you are going to treat the secondary or post-sale discounts. Again, this is very easy, very common sense based. If you have common sense, there is no need to study this clarification. But ma'am, that only we are lacking. No, so you'll have to teach. Okay, I'll teach you. Chalo. So we are asking whether full ITC is available to recipient making discounted payments to suppliers on account of commercial credit notes. Okay. First of all, tell me, for commercial credit notes, will the supplier get any reduction in output liability? Let us say, ma'am, we have Venkat here. Ma'am, I made 4 sales to Venkat. One for 50751, another for 20389 and similar amounts. Now, when I made a total, I realized that I have to recover 20183 rupees from Venkat, making a total of all the invoices. Now, ma'am, I said, array, it's fine. You round figure pay me 20,000. Round figure pay me 20,000. It's fine. I don't want this 183 rupees. Is this a discount? Yes. Was this prior agreed? No. Can I link this to invoice? No. Meaning, ma'am, can I issue a GST credit note for the same? No, ma'am. I will be issuing a credit note for 183 because I have to settle my accounts. But will this be a GST credit note? The answer is no. Ma'am, if this is not a GST credit note, I will not be reducing my value of supply. So even if I have actually collected 20,108, I have actually collected only 20,000, I will still be paying GST on this full amount. Right, ma'am. Because non-GST credit notes, I cannot reduce my outward liability as a supplier. So supplier would be paying GST on this full amount. So the question here is, can recipient also take ITC on this full amount, or recipient will have to reverse ITC on 183? Government is clarifying that, see, government has got full GST from the supplier. Government is also okay to give full ITC to the recipient. No problem at all. So we are saying that yes, full ITC will be available to recipient making discounted payments because supplier is not making any reduction in the original transaction value. On the full transaction value, GST liability has been discharged by the supplier. Government got full GST, then why are they having a problem? They can give ITC fully to the recipient. Accordingly, the liability will also not get reduced and therefore there is no need of making reversal on the recipient's part. However, not right now. Later, you might get a doubt. We have studied something as Rule 37 in the chapter of ITC. What was that? Take 3-4 seconds, recall Rule 37 from ITC chapter. We call it as the 180-day rule. Right, ma'am. This rule says that the date on which invoice is issued, from there, within 180 days, the recipient has to pay full consideration to the supplier. If not paid, the day on which these 180 days expire, immediate whichever next freebie you are filing, you will have to reverse the ITC. Meaning, ma'am, if recipient is not giving payment to supplier within 180 days, then on that proportionate payment, the recipient will have to reverse ITC. This is what Rule 37 is saying. But ma'am, this clarification is saying that recipient can take ITC even if they are not making payment. Is this not contradictory? See, understand, we'll interpret them harmoniously so that you don't get a doubt later. Here we are saying there is a failure to pay. Rule 37 says there is a failure to pay, meaning recipient has not paid the invoice amount. Supplier is asking the invoice amount, recipient is not paying. But this clarification says some small amount rounded off, some discounted payments given, and supplier is agreeing to give those discounts. Supplier is not having any problem giving these discounts. It is a mutual agreement between supplier and recipient. Supplier is not reducing any outward liability also. In that case, recipient can take full ITC. But when recipient is failing to make the payment, it is not a contract, it is not an agreement, it is not a mutual settlement. Supplier is wanting the money, recipient is failing to make the payment. In that case, we will be applying Rule 37, and in that case, the recipient will have to reverse the proportionate ITC. So I do understand that you might feel, ma'am, these two things are not matching. These two things are opposite to each other. Here you are saying even without making payment I can take ITC, and here you are saying if not making payment within 180 days you cannot take ITC. Is this not contradictory? You might feel so, but it is not. It is about the harmonious interpretation. So we are saying that if the recipient is failing to make the payment within 180 days, then the recipient has to reverse the ITC. But there is no failure, ma'am. Some adjustment settlement done mutually between supplier and recipient, commercial credit note issued, supplier is paying full GST, so recipient will also get full ITC. Done? Yes, ma'am. Then next point is about post-sale discount by manufacturer to the dealer or distributor. Now see, ma'am, in Schedule 2, supply under GST chapter, we study that whenever you are charging consideration to do something, to not do something, or to tolerate something, there is a contract, there is a consideration, it qualifies as supply. So if I pay something to someone because I want them to not do something, or I want them to explicitly do something, or I want them to tolerate something, it is going to be classified as supply under GST. So here we are saying that, ma'am, when a manufacturer is giving some post-sale discounts to dealers, is it because the manufacturer wants the dealer to push the sale, induce further supply, to do something, therefore this discount is given, and therefore it should be considered as a separate consideration and made taxable? This is the question. Now what is going to be the answer? Let us take an example to understand this better. So ma'am, Sony is the manufacturer of televisions and other various electrical appliances. Their dealer is, let us say, Vijay Sales or Sales India or Chroma or Reliance Digital, any other store that you can imagine. So these people are dealers or distributors and Sony is the manufacturer. Now ma'am, and then now Vijay Sales is going to sell it to the customer, right ma'am? So we are saying that if Sony is not having any contract with this customer, Sony has not promised anything to the customer, Sony is purely supplying the items to Vijay Sales. Vijay Sales purchases them, becomes the owner, and then subsequently sells these items to the customers. In this case, ma'am, whatever transaction is happening between Sony and Vijay Sales, it has nothing to do with the further discounts or further offers or promotions that Vijay Sales gives to customers. So here, whatever discount, whatever post-sale benefits Sony is giving to Vijay Sales, it is not for inducement of further supply. Because ma'am, whether to induce further supply or not purely depends on Vijay Sales mood. Because ma'am, this transaction is independent and this transaction is independent. So we are saying that when there is no agreement between manufacturer, Sony, and the end consumer, the dealer, as in Vijay Sales, operates on a principal to principal basis capacity, becoming owner of the goods. So Vijay Sales will purchase from Sony, become the owner, and then further supply it to the end customer. So we are saying that because the manufacturer, Sony, is not explicitly telling Vijay Sales to do anything, they are not paying for inducement of further supply, and therefore this discount cannot be considered as a consideration. But let us say, ma'am, today Sony is running an ad on television. saying that if you purchase 2 televisions from Sony, we will give you the third one for free. If you purchase 1 television from Sony, we are going to give you 30% discount on the second television. Now, ma'am, all these offers, all these benefits are promised by the manufacturer to the end customer. Now, ma'am, Vijay Sales will have to do something because Sony is telling Vijay Sales to do so. Are we understanding? Ma'am, here Vijay Sales was independent to do whatever they want. So the post-supply discounts were not consideration. But here, ma'am, manufacturer is having some agreement with the end consumer to supply goods at some discounted price or any kind of offer going on. Right. Then in this case, whatever post-supply discount is given to the dealer, in that case, we are giving this amount, giving this discount, giving this consideration to the dealer because we want him to do something for us, for the customers. And therefore, this is a monetary value for inducement of further supply. And therefore, this will be considered as consideration under GST. Very simple understanding. If, ma'am, the dealer operates on principal capacity, he will purchase the goods from the manufacturer and then decide on his own what he want to do. Then whatever discounts given by dealers to the discounts given by manufacturers to the dealers post sale, no consideration. But manufacturer is directly making some kind of promises to the end consumers, and now they are giving these discounts to Vijay Sales, telling them that you have to do this for the end customer. I am giving you this much discount because you will have to give this to the end consumer. In that case, they are paying these amounts or they are giving these discounts to specifically do something, agreeing to an obligation to do an act, and therefore you are giving this amount to induce the further supply, and therefore it will be considered as a consideration under GST. Right, ma'am. Then we move on to the next part, which is post-sale discount extended by manufacturers to dealers. Again, it is about the post-sale discounts only, but now this is related to some promotional activities or events. So, ma'am, let us say Croma or Vijay Sales decide that this is Christmas, New Year time. So, outside our stores, we'll be hiring some people to come dress up as Santa Claus, attract people, attract kids, bring them in, and we will make sales to them. All these promotions, Vijay Sales is doing independently. Croma is doing independently to attract customers to bring them to the store. Sony, the manufacturer, has not said anything. In that case, if manufacturer is giving some discount to Vijay Sales, can we consider it as the manufacturer is giving this discount because they want Vijay Sales to invite a Santa Claus? No, ma'am. Everything is being operated on a principal to principal basis. Sony is not telling Vijay Sales or Croma to do anything. It is doing on its own. So you cannot say that these discounts are given for these promotional activities. But let us say Sony brings some kind of a virtual cartoon or character, and now they are saying that outside every electronic store where Sony items are available, we want this a man to be dressed up like this specific character or this specific cartoon so people can identify the brand. Ma'am, a lot of companies do this. They make some virtual characters and then people start associating the brand with those characters and you start recognizing the brand. So let us say for brand building, for promotional activities, Sony comes up with this idea that we want all the stores selling our products to bring Santa Claus, to bring a cartoon outside the store, dance, attract people, bring them to store so that from a distance people can identify, oh, that character, yes, Sony products would be available there. Right, ma'am. In this case, again, Sony is telling Vijay Sales to bring this Santa Claus, to bring this character and make such promotional events and activities happen. For this, of course, they'll have to pay something to Vijay Sales or give some discounts to Vijay Sales. Again, they are giving this money or discounts to do something, to undertake these promotional activities. So that is going to be consideration taxable. So we are saying that if any such discounts are extended normally, they are not consideration, as in they are not given to promote the sales. However, GST will be applicable if the dealer undertakes specific promotional activity. I am bringing that character, I am paying to Santa Claus specifically because it is written in the agreement that I will have to do this activity in order to promote sales. It is written in the agreement between the dealer and the manufacturer that the dealer will have to do this. In that case, it is a consideration to do something, so it will be taxable. It will be considered as consideration. Otherwise, normal discounts given, no supply, as in no consideration, no GST, because ma'am, it has nothing to do with whatever the dealer is doing further. Right, ma'am. So very simple clarification, very common sense based as such. Are we all clear till here? Give me a thumbs up. Say yes, ma'am. Are you understanding, enjoying, remembering things? See, to understand amendments, you should first know the original law. So if you are weak on that, you are not able to recall the original law, you first do that and then come to the amendment video. Because I am not teaching you everything. I am just telling you the changes here and there. To make the changes, you should be knowing the earlier law position. Right, ma'am. Done is this session going? Fire, fire, heart, heart, bomb, bomb, emojis in the comment section. I want to see. Tell me it is all going great. We are understanding. Yes, ma'am. Chalo. Coming on to next chapter, which is returns under GST. As such, there is no change, I would say. It is just the presentation being made better here. Ma'am, we were not studying section 38 earlier, but now government says that, see, section 37 is for you declaring your outward sales, GSTR 1. 39 is for 3B. So 38 we are saying it is about inward supplies. But ma'am, we do not actually declare our inward supplies at any place. When the supplier files GSTR 1, these inward supplies are automatically reflected in our 2A and 2B. This will come under section 38. Right, ma'am. So we are saying whatever details of outward supplies a registered person furnishes under section 37, these details are made available to the recipient in the form of ITC in GSTR 2A, 2B. So what is 2A, ma'am? There is no change in this. Whatever 2A, 2B I have taught you earlier, everything remains the same. That ma'am, 2A is a read-only. Yes, both are read-only statements, ma'am. I cannot make any change in 2A, 2B. It is being prepared based on whatever my supplier is furnishing in GSTR 1. Right, ma'am. So the only difference is that ma'am, 2A is updated on a real time basis. Even if my supplier files late GSTR 1, it will immediately reflect in my 2A. But 2B is a static statement, ma'am. Whatever supplies the supplier furnishes till the due date of GSTR 1, only those are reflected in that month 2B. If my supplier is filing late returns, then in the next month 2B, all these changes will be reflected. So everything is same. I have just made change in the way of presentation in the book. So if you are using version 6 or 7, on page number 203 and 204, you have to strike off the paragraphs related to 2A, 2B and attach this page, because this is more cleaner and better in the presentation, and plus we have to add the reference of section 38. Right, ma'am, done. Chalo. So till here, we complete all the amendments from important terms till returns. This is all that we have to do. Being a registered person, I have to determine whether it is supply or not. I have to file my returns. I have to take ITC. There is no change in account records or e-way bill, TDS, TCS, payment of tax, job work, all those chapters. There are no changes. Whatever you have studied earlier, everything remains exactly same. Now, ma'am, what department will do? Litigation. So, in the litigation part, ma'am, we had some chapters like assessment, audit, inspection, demand recovery, appeals revisions, advance ruling, liability to pay in certain cases, offences, penalties. Right, ma'am? All these chapters are a part of litigation. Now, happy news for you. There is no change in assessment, no change in audit, no change in inspection, search, seizure, arrest, no change in demand recovery, no change in advance ruling, no change in liability to pay, and no change in offences penalties chapter. So whatever you have studied, the revision videos available on YouTube for all these topics remain exactly same, no change. Ma'am, there is a change in appeals and revision chapter, and this is a good major change which can be tested also in your examination. Right, ma'am. So we understand the change in the chapter of appeals and revision. Right, ma'am. The first change is with respect to the pre-deposit part. And this same to same change is applicable in the tribunal part also. Meaning, ma'am, when I go from adjudicating authority to appellate authority, I have to pay some pre-deposit. When I go from appellate authority to appellate tribunal, if I am aggrieved, again I have to pay pre-deposit. And both the pre-deposits are same. Earlier they were different. The tribunal deposit was double and all, but they amended it in the last attempt only and made it same. Right, ma'am? So now there is an amendment in the amount of pre-deposit. This amendment is applicable here also when you pay the pre-deposit going from adjudicating authority to appellate authority, and this amendment is applicable here also when you go to appellate tribunal. So this change I'll teach you here, and the similar same to same change is applicable here also when you are going to the tribunal being aggrieved by the order of appellate authority or revisional authority. Right, ma'am? So what the change in pre-deposit is saying? See, ma'am, first of all, there was this a bracket here which says that if you are filing appeals with respect to the orders of section 129 and all, you have to pay some percentage of penalty. That is all removed, striked off, right? So that section 129 bracket you have to strike off, remove. Pre-deposit made simple for all kinds of orders. It is going to be same now. So, ma'am, what was the earlier pre-deposit? Whatever amount I am admitting. As per the earlier provisions, whatever amount I am admitting. By the term amount, I mean tax, interest, penalty, fine, fees, everything. Amount includes everything. Tax, interest, penalty, fees, everything. If I am admitting these amounts, I have to pay them in full. Of course, why are you waiting? If you admit that this is payable by you of course have to pay. But ma'am, whatever I am disputing, only 10% of tax amount I was required to pay. If I am disputing penalty, if I am disputing interest, if I am disputing fine, I don't have to pay any pre-deposit on those amounts. Only the tax that I am disputing, I have to pay 10% of the same. Maximum 20 crore under CGST. This was the earlier law with respect to pre-deposit. This still remains the same. However, a small change, a small addition that they have made here is, they are saying, what if, ma'am, there is an order where there is no tax amount being involved. The order is only for penalty and I am disputing it. Then as per the earlier provisions, penalty dispute, no pre-deposit. But now we are saying that if an order is not having any tax amount, the order involved only penalty and I am disputing it, then I have to pay 10% of penalty in the form of pre-deposit. See, understand. I'll give you 3 examples and you will get absolute clarity. Let us say, ma'am, my order says, case number A, I have to pay tax of 100 and I have to pay penalty of 30 as per my order. I am disputing this entirely. If you dispute this entirely, you only have to pay a pre-deposit of tax into 10% 10. Because the order contains tax, you only pay pre-deposit on the tax. Now let us say, ma'am, my order is for tax 100 rupees, penalty 30 rupees. I admit the tax. But I dispute the penalty. Then there will be no pre-deposit. Because, ma'am, your order contains tax. It is not that your order is not containing tax. The order is containing tax, I am just not disputing it. So again, the original law will only apply, and on penalty, I will not calculate any pre-deposit because this I have fully admitted. Meaning whatever you admit, that the full 100 you have to pay only, plus extra no pre-deposit you have to pay. Because you are not disputing any tax. See, if I am admitting 100, this 100 to any which ways I am going to pay in full. Plus for the disputed part, I am saying no pre-deposit. This 100 to, of course, because you are admitting, you will pay. Now let us say, ma'am, my order is only penalty. Only penalty of 30. No tax being involved. And now I dispute this penalty. Then we are saying you have to pay 30 into 10%, which is 3 in the form of pre-deposit. So if my order contains tax, then the earlier provisions will only be applicable, that whatever amount I admit, full I have to pay. Whatever tax I dispute, 1 second. Whatever amount I admit, full I have to pay, that too always will be applicable. But whatever tax I dispute, only 10% of that I have to pay. But ma'am, if my order is not involving tax only, it is an only penalty order, then if you dispute the penalty, you have to pay 10% of that penalty that you are disputing. Are we understanding, everyone? Say yes, ma'am. So we are saying 100% of admitted amount, always you have to pay. You were paying, you will pay, always. 10% of tax and dispute, if there is tax involved in the order. But for orders which involve only penalty, there is no tax in the order, only penalty without tax being demanded. In that case, your pre-deposit becomes 10% of the penalty. Is it absolutely clear to all? Yes, ma'am. This same to same change is applicable here also, because the amount of pre-deposit remains same whether you are going to appellate authority or you are going to appellate tribunal. Right, ma'am. But this one more green part we are seeing here, this is again not important because you already know this. They have just introduced this amendment to bring more clarity in law and to streamline the processes. So, ma'am, when I go from adjudicating authority to appellate authority, I always have to file the order electronically, right, ma'am? We have studied this here, that you are always going to file electronic appeals. Yes, ma'am. Always electronic appeal you have to file. When you file electronic appeal, provisional acknowledgement is issued immediately. And you don't have to submit the copy of order because it is electronically available. So your provisional acknowledgement becomes final acknowledgement, becomes the date of filing appeal. But ma'am, in some situations where the order against which I am appealing is not available online, not available on the common portal, in that case, I am allowed to go and file manual appeals. In that case, ma'am, the day on which I file appeal, provisional acknowledgement is issued to me. Within 7 days from there, I have to submit a certified copy of the order. If I do so, then my provisional acknowledgement becomes final. Otherwise, later whenever I submit the copy, that becomes my final date of filing appeal. This is nothing new that I am teaching you, right? No amendment, no change here. This was there in the book. This is there in the book. I have just changed the presentation. That's all. The understanding fully remains same. Now, when you go to appellate tribunal, government is saying that entire same procedure, just like section 107, will be applicable here also. This is the only amendment. So, they are saying that when I go to appellate tribunal, I will file appeal electronically and provisional acknowledgement will be issued to me immediately. If this decision is available on the portal, meaning I am making electronic appeals, so the date of filing appeal will be my date of provisional acknowledgement only. But if this copy of order is not available on the portal, I am not filing electronic appeals, it is manual appeal, then in that case, the full procedure of submitting copy within 7 days and all will be applicable, ditto same to same as section 107. So practically, if you see, they have made it more simple. The procedure exactly same whether you go to appellate authority or appellate tribunal. The pre-deposit exactly same whether you go to appellate authority or appellate tribunal. So they have just streamlined the procedure and made it more simple for you. Right, ma'am. Then ma'am, one small procedure introduced here. Again, it is very, very simple and less relevant for exam. Ma'am, we had studied a point in appellate tribunal which says that normally one judicial member and one technical member, two members together will be hearing a case of appellate tribunal. But if these conditions are satisfied, as in there is no question of law and the amount of tax, ITC, fine, fee, penalty, everything combined is not exceeding 50 lakh rupees, we have taken approval of president and some other conditions are fulfilled, then also even a single member bench can hear the case. Normally, one technical, one judicial, two member. But if all these conditions are satisfied, then even a single member bench can hear. Now, what is the procedure that has to be followed when the case is being heard by a single member bench is what they have explained here via an amendment. So, we are saying first of all, who takes all these decisions, ma'am? So, a case will be heard by which bench, single member or two members, who will hear the case? All these decisions are taken by whom? The president of the appellate tribunal, right, ma'am? So, we are saying the president of the appellate tribunal. or if the president authorizes vice president, then vice president of the appellate tribunal. With respect to any state bench, so whenever a case is coming, so they will decide, they will see whether is there any question of law being involved. No. So can we give this case to a single member bench? This decision will be taken by president, or if authorized, vice president. So we are saying the president or the vice president if authorized in respect of any state bench, either on own motion or application filed by parties to the appeal. Scrutinize. So they will scrutinize whether the appeal and transfer of such appeal to single member bench can be made or not if there is no question of law. So first thing that they have to do is to determine whether if there is any question of law involved, then to no point 2 members compulsory will have to hear the case. But if there is no question of law being involved, they can transfer. They will transfer? No. They might. They can transfer the case only to a single member, to whom to transfer all these decisions will be taken by president. Now let us say, ma'am, the case is already given to a single member bench. And ma'am, while hearing the allotted appeal, the single member bench realizes that there might be question of law involved. Earlier, the president did a scrutiny and gave the case to single member. But now, ma'am, while hearing, the single member comes to conclusion that no, I think question of law is being involved. They will again inform the president to reconsider giving the case to single member. So in case the single member bench, while hearing the appeal, comes to a conclusion that the appeal may involve a question of law, this single member bench will write this reason in writing, record it, and give back the appeal to the president, vice president for reconsideration, that you please check it once. Is it okay if I hear as a single member, or no, I feel there's a question of law, we should be 2 people. Right. Now, ma'am, during this scrutiny, as per the part B, or when they are making the initial consideration as per part 1. So as per sub rule 1 or sub rule 2, whenever the president is deciding whether to give the case to single member or to 1 judicial 1 technical 2 member bench, they will also take into consideration that if in the same state some similar nature of cases have happened earlier, at that point of time, did 2 member listen, or did 2 member hear, or only 1 member bench had taken the decision? So they have to take the past trends also into consideration. So we are saying a fact as to whether in respect of same taxable person within a state, the same issue for same or a different period had already been heard or decided by a bench comprising of a technical and a judicial member. So this shall also be taken into consideration. So we are saying for this same person, same state, same issue might be in some another period. Same person, same state, same issue might be in another period. If has happened and at that point of time 2 member bench have heard, then again we should give the case to 2 member bench only. So this also you have to consider while distributing the business of tribunal. And the last point says, of course, you have to check the limit of 50 lakh rupees. And in this limit of 50 lakh rupees, you take a total of tax, ITC, fine, penalty, fees, everything, not just the tax. Right, ma'am? So the president will make sure that the amount is not exceeding 50 lakh, there is no question of law, and then give the case to single member. If at any point of time single member feels that no, there is question of law, they will refer back to president and tell them to reconsider. While deciding originally or while reconsidering, they also have to make sure that they are seeing that for the same person, same state, same nature, maybe in another period, if 2 members have heard, then we should again make the case here by 2 members only. This is the procedure for hearing the case by a single member bench in appellate tribunal. Right, ma'am. And the last small addition in appeals and revision chapter says that either it is appellate authority or appellate tribunal, whenever they are issuing any order after hearing the case. Generally, ma'am, the order ranges in pages and pages because they note everything. This happened based on this decision is taken, conclusion, this, that. It might be confusing. So they are saying whatever normal order you issue, you keep issuing. Plus, you just issue a small summary in which what we are concerned with is what is the final amount payable. So we are saying your normal order, okay. But appellate authority and appellate tribunal along with their normal order shall now also issue a clear summary in APL 04 and APL 04A respectively for both the authorities, where they are just going to clearly indicate that this is the final amount of demand. After the case being closed, this is the final amount that has to be demanded, that has to be recovered from the applicant. So only for the final amount, please issue a summary so that we can avoid confusion and reading long orders. Done, ma'am. Then the remaining chapter of appeals and revisions remains same about section 120, section 121, non-appealable orders, rectification of errors and all those provisions exactly same. So major changes as such are at 4 places. 1, pre-deposit. If only penalty order, 10% of pre-deposit. Second, ma'am, the procedure. So the procedure for tribunal has been now made exactly same as the appellate authority. Third, ma'am, procedure for a single member bench to hear the case. And fourth, appellate authority as well as appellate tribunal have to issue a summary indicating the final amount being demanded as per the order. So these 4 changes you have to make in the appeals and revision chapter. Other than this entire litigation, there is no change. From assessment till offences, everything remains same. Only appeals revision, there is change. Now, ma'am, 2 more chapters in GST, refunds and miscellaneous. Small changes are there. One small change in refund chapter and one small new section being inserted in miscellaneous provisions. Let us read and understand. Chalo. So, ma'am, in the chapter of refunds under GST, we study a specific point which says that whenever a zero-rated supplier is applying for refund, rather than following the full procedure, doing the full verification, only on a prima facie examination basis, within 7 days, 90% provisional refund should be given to these zero-rated suppliers. This is nothing new. We have already studied this, that for normal people, full verification examination will be done and after that, refund is granted to the applicant. But ma'am, for zero-rated suppliers, taking refund is a daily activity, their working capital is blocked, etc. So, on a provisional basis once, before the final order, as per RFD 04, on a provisional basis, once 90% refund is given to them within 7 days of their acknowledgement. Right, ma'am. This we have studied. Now government has inserted some ineligibilities in this, that even if you are a zero-rated supplier, still you will not get provisional refund. The full procedure of Rule 92 will be followed just like normal people, and just like normal people, final refund will be sanctioned to you. No provisional refund of 90% for 2 types of people, even if you are zero-rated. One, if you have not undergone your Aadhaar authentication. So as per Rule 10B, if you have not yet done Aadhaar authentication, we will not give you provisional refund. And second, ma'am, if you are supplier of Areca nuts, as in supari, pan masala, tobacco and manufactured tobacco substitutes or essential oils. Ma'am, you are a zero-rated supplier, but you are supplier of Areca nuts, pan masala, tobacco, essential oils, then also full procedure of normal Rule 92 will be followed and you will not be given provisional refund of 90% within 7 days. So this provisional refund provision applies to all the zero-rated suppliers. They get 90% refund within 7 days of their acknowledgement, but it will not be applicable to 2 people. We are not saying that these 2 people will not get refund. They will get refund. They will not get 90% provisional refund in a fast manner. Full procedure like normal people will be followed to them, and then full refund either will be sanctioned or will be rejected if Aadhaar authentication not done, or you are supplier of Areca nuts, pan masala, tobacco or essential oils. Ma'am, for other people also, let us say I am a normal supplier of these butterflies, as in the clutchers. I am a zero-rated supplier of clutchers, ma'am. But still, proper officer feels that no, I might have made some errors, I might be doing something wrong because of which I should not be given provisional refund. So they can record the reasons in writing, may not grant me the provisional refund, may decide to follow the full procedure of Rule 92. But if they do so, they will have to record a reason, because normally as per law, zero-rated suppliers should be given provisional refund. But if they are not given provisional refund and the full procedure is being followed, what is the reason to do so? The proper officer has to record, and then officer can continue to follow the full procedure. And ma'am, normally taking money from government, taking refund from government is not that easy, right? So whenever they give you refund, they revalidate your order always and then only sanction you the refund. But revalidation is not required for RFD 04. RFD 04 is basically the provisional assessment, provisional refund order, right ma'am? So RFD 04 is provisional refund order. Any which ways the refund is on a provisional basis only. We are yet to finalize it. So it's okay, the final order will be revalidated. So we are saying that for provisional refund, no revalidation required. It's fine. If the order is issued, you give the refund on a provisional basis to the applicant. This is not that important. For MCQ purpose, this you can consider as important, that normal zero rated suppliers do get 90% refund provisionally. But ma'am, if other authentication is not done, or if you are supplier of Areca nuts, pan masala, tobacco, essential oils, then also full procedure, full verification examination will be done and then refund will be sanctioned. No refund sanctioned based on provisional basis. Right ma'am. And then moving on to last addition of a new section in the chapter of miscellaneous provisions. Very simple and very less important. Right, ma'am. So, ma'am, a new section, section 148A, is inserted in miscellaneous provision chapter. This is about track and trace mechanism for certain goods. So certain goods which are very high value or risky, or goods on which people tend to evade taxes, for such goods, government is introducing this track and trace mechanism, where government is saying that not all goods, some goods which we will specify, or some people we will specify who are dealing in some certain kinds of goods. For these goods and people, we will establish a system of affixing UIM, unique identification marking. What is this, ma'am? Consider it as a kind of a digital stamp or a digital mark or any kind of marking which is unique, secure and non-removable. So what they're trying to do is, it is kind of a chip mechanism where you have to affix this UIM on your goods, and the details, the information with respect to these goods goes to government via a system being established. So now government can at any point of time track and trace where these goods are based on this unique identification marking. So it is kind of a GPS tracker, you can think of it as that ways, right ma'am? So government may establish a system for affixing a unique identification marking on goods, and in this unique identification marking, all the electronic data will be stored in this marking, and the government will have the access to this information. So government will prescribe that what kind of information you have to record in this UIM, unique identification marking. So whatever government prescribes, the specified people will be liable to affix this UIM in a prescribed manner, to furnish the information and maintain all the accounts records. So you have to maintain the records, you also have to furnish the records with the government, furnish all the details of manufacturing machinery, that on what machinery, right from the manufacturing stage of these goods, where it is being manufactured, what is happening, where the goods are going, all the details will go to government because of this UIM. And because this is an electronic system, to run this system, money will be needed. So government may also charge some amount from these specified people relating to the usage of system. So these people will also be required to pay an amount related to system if prescribed. If you are contravening, meaning let us say your goods are notified, or you are a person notified who have to comply with this UIM mechanism and you are not doing so, they can levy a penalty on you, which can be 10% of tax payable on such goods, or 1 lakh rupees, whichever is higher. Meaning, ma'am, the minimum penalty becomes 1 lakh rupees under CGST, same to same under SGST. So practically 2 lakh rupees if you are not complying with the UIM mechanism, if applicable on you. Right, ma'am. So in case of contravention, the person shall, in addition to any penalty, any normal demand recovery you have to pay, that you any which ways have to pay. Plus we are saying extra penalty of 10% of tax on such goods, or 1 lakh, whichever is higher under CGST, you will be required to pay. What is this UIM basically, ma'am? It is kind of a digital stamp or a mark or any kind of marking through which the information can be stored, contained and transferred. This of course has to be unique for all the goods, secure and non-removable. It's not like a sticker so anyone can remove it. No, ma'am. Done. Yes, ma'am. So here we complete all the amendments for the GST part of IDT. All these amendments are already contained in the version 8 of the book. So if you are using version 8 or you have studied from a batch in which I have taught using version 8, all these points were already covered in your book and your lectures. Nothing extra you were required to see. But now, ma'am, the next 10 minutes, only one small amendment in customs and one small part in FTP has not been included in version 8 of the book. So you have to see the amendment video for the same. Right, ma'am. So if you are having version 7, then so you have to make this change only for version 8 people also. In the provisional assessment part, importation, exportation chapter, provisional assessment. Right, ma'am. In the finalization of provisional assessment part, we have a small change. See, the interest calculation and everything remains same only. So, the similar way how we used to calculate the interest in provisional assessment. For short payment 15%, for excess payment 6% after expiry of 3 months from the first day of the month. All this remains exactly same. So, your question answers in the question bank will not as such change because they are majorly related to the interest calculation. But the procedure for finalization of provisional assessment, there is change with respect to the time limits which we have to study. Right, ma'am. So the earlier finalization of provisional assessment regulations have been replaced by the customs finalization of provisional assessment regulations 2025. So I'll explain you first in rough and then we will read from the notes. Right, ma'am. So we are saying here that the day on which provisional assessment is done, within 15 days from here, the proper officer has to inform you. Inform you about what? Inform you about whatever now the extra documents or information they will be needing from your side to finish off the provisional assessment and finalize it. So once you pay the taxes on a provisional basis, that could be because of some missing documents, missing information, or you have provided information but officer is not satisfied, they want to conduct an inquiry, all these things, whatever they want to do. For these reasons, provisional assessment might be done. So the day on which provisional assessment is done, the day on which provisional assessment is done, within 15 days from here, the officer will inform you that please you provide us with all the information, document details, whatever they are wanting. So let's side by side read also. So the proper officer will inform to the importer or exporter about whatever documents or information are required to be produced within 15 days of provisional assessment. The day on which they are informing you, within 2 months plus extension of 2 months from here, you have to provide the information. Right. Provisional assessment say 15 days mein, they'll tell you what all information they need. The day on which they inform you, within 2 months, normal time limit plus extension of 2 months, you have to provide the information. This can be extended further also, but maximum extension possible can be 14 months from provisional assessment. Maximum extension possible here could be 14 months from provisional assessment. So they are saying normal time limit whenever they are informing you within 2 months plus 2 months from there. Plus let us say I am asking a 15 days extension plus 1 month extension plus 3 months extension. You can take extensions. But at the max department is saying from provisional assessment within 14 months information should be given. If the reason for provisional assessment was some kind of an inquiry which department wanted to conduct, so this inquiry should also be completed within the 14 months time from provisional assessment maximum. Ma'am, let us say 14 months from provisional assessment are gone. I have still not provided the relevant information then department will no longer wait for you. If your time limit to provide information is over, whatever information is available with the department, based on that only, they will proceed to finalize the assessment. So either I provide information within this time, then the day on which I provide, from there finalization will start. But if I don't provide and the time limit to provide information, the time limit to conduct inquiry is gone already, which is 14 months from the date of provisional assessment, then whatever information is available with the department, based on that information only, they will continue to finalize my provisional assessment. So we are saying the importer exporter has to make available within 2 months plus 2 months plus extension. Extension will not be calculated from the day of informing, right? This 2 months plus 2 months are calculated from the day when officer is informing you about the details required. But these 14 months, which is the maximum time limit, are calculated from the date of provisional assessment only. So you make available the information and inform to officer. If officer wants to conduct any inquiry, that also has to be completed within this 14 months from provisional assessment only. If I don't provide the information, then whatever available records are there with the officer, based on that only, officer can proceed to finalize my assessment. Now they are saying the day on which I provide this information, the day on which I provide this information within 3 months plus 2 months from here, my assessment should be finalized. The day on which I provide the information within 3 months plus 2 months from here, my assessment should be finalized. Plus, there can be more extension, and that extension can be 2 years from provisional assessment. So what they've done here is they have calculated all the extended maximum time limits from the original provisional assessment. Interim dates are calculated from the interim events, but the full extended time is calculated from the date of provisional assessment. So we are saying the day on which I provide the information and I inform the officer that this is the document you asked, this is the information you asked, or the inquiry from the officer's point is done, finished, conducted. Then from that date only, within 3 months plus 2 months, your assessment will be finalized. It can be extended further, but the maximum extended time limit possible here is 2 years, not from this date, 2 years from the original provisional assessment. In extreme, rarest of the rare situation, for the reasons to be recorded in writing, these 2 years can be extended by 1 more year. So in the rarest situation with the maximum extensions possible within 3 years from provisional assessment, including extension, your assessment will be finalized. So we are saying that the proper officer has to finalize the provisional assessment within 3 months plus 2 months at a time from date of conclusion of inquiry. So whenever the inquiry is concluded, whenever the information document is received, or if not received but the time limit is over, then within 3 months plus 2 months from there, provisional assessment has to be finalized. Maximum time can be 2 years from provisional assessment plus 1 year extension for reasons to be recorded in writing. So this is the crux, the summary of all the time limits. I'll just repeat it once. From the date of provisional assessment, within 15 days, officer will inform what officer is wanting. The day on which the officer informs, within 2 months plus 2 months from there, you will provide the information. Maximum you will have to provide within 14 months from the date of provisional assessment. The day on which you provide, from there, within 3 months plus 2 months, assessment will be finalized. Extension possible, but maximum 2 years from the date of provisional assessment, and that can be further extended by 1 year. Done, ma'am. Now we are saying that let us say, ma'am, it was not possible to finish the final assessment within this 2 year plus 1 year time limit. Why, ma'am? Because some information that we wanted from an authority outside India. So some legal process is being followed outside India, and from there we will get the information, and it is taking some time. Or let us say a similar appeal is pending in the court or tribunal and we are waiting for the appeal to be finalized. Let us say there is a stay order. Or ma'am, the importer exporter has gone to the settlement commission or the interim board. Or ma'am, the CBIC, the board has told us specifically to kept the matter pending because they are finalizing something. So ma'am, these situations are not in the hand of officer, right? So because of these reasons, if the officer is unable to finalize the provisional assessment, the officer will have to inform the importer or exporter that because of these reasons, I am not able to finalize your provisional assessment within this time of 2 years. But ma'am, the day on which this matter is sorted, let us say this information is received from outside India. Ma'am, the decision of court has come. The stay order is now removed. Or ma'am, the settlement commission interim board has stepped aside. Or ma'am, the CBIC has now told us to not keep the matter pending. So ma'am, the day on which this restriction is uplifted, from there immediately, within 2 years, you will finalize the assessment. So we are saying the time of 2 years for finalization will be calculated from the date when the reason ceased to exist and not from the date of provisional assessment. Right, ma'am, simple. So normally within 2 years from provisional assessment, you have to finalize the assessment. But ma'am, if because of these reasons unable to finalize, then the day on which these reasons cease to exist, from there within 2 years, you are going to finalize your assessment. Done. The day on which final order is issued, within 90 days from there, the applicant has to pay all the duty, interest, fine, penalty, whatever being demanded. If no, then using the security furnished, department can go for recovery also. So where the duty, interest, fine, penalty or any other amount due is not paid for more than 90 days after finalization of assessment, the department can go ahead and adjust the amount from your security and make recoveries wherever the sum is due. For refund, they will follow the normal procedure from the date of final assessment. Within 3 months, if they give you refund, no interest. After 3 months, they'll give you the refund with 6% per annum. So this all remains same. The interest and all remains the same only. Only the time limits in the procedure have been changed. Right, ma'am. This is about the finalization of provisional assessment, the only amendment in entire customs. Rest everything, ma'am, classification, valuation, types of duty, baggage, warehousing, import, exportation, levy, exemption, IGCR rules, everything same, no amendment. One small change in foreign trade policy is there. I have already shared new notes for foreign trade policy. However, if you are referring version 8, no need to take a printout of the full new notes. There is just one small change in the RoadTEP scheme which you can make. So here, I have already uploaded a new video for foreign trade policy on YouTube, and there is just one small change in the RoadTEP scheme, and it is here. That earlier, these advanced authorization people, EOUs, were not allowed to take benefit of RoadTEP scheme, but now the applicability has been extended. So till 2026 March at least, and they might extend it further also. We are saying that for eligible exports from DTA for advanced authorization export oriented units and special economic zones, RoadTEP scheme is applicable. They can take benefit of RoadTEP scheme. Earlier they were given here in the ineligibility part, but now they are eligible to take the benefit of the RoadTEP scheme. This is the only amendment in foreign trade policy, but still I have shared full notes of foreign trade policy for free on Telegram. You can download, take a printout and refer the revision video of foreign trade policy. Rest everything remains same. All these amendment notes that I have referred in this lecture are shared on Telegram channel. The link of Telegram channel is already there in the description box. You can go through there. The name of Telegram channel is CA Riddhi Bagmar. You can directly search also. So for all the new questions being added, amendment in the question, there is a separate question bank amendment PDF being shared, and then we have shared this PDF which is for the changes in the handwritten notes. So everything is there available with you on the Telegram channel. You can go download, take a printout. I have also shared your first revision planner for IDT, your second revision planner for IDT, your 1.5-day revision planner for IDT. Everything is shared on the Telegram channel. You can download and plan your IDT revision accordingly. SAFL batch for Jan 26, May 26 is already recorded and available on the website. For September 26 and Jan 27, the SAFL batch new in 100% English will start in March. Yes, in the March first week, because for September exam, the cutoff date is 28 February. See, all the amendments that come up to 28 February will be applicable in September exam. Then I will need some 10-15 days time to finalize the book, incorporate all the amendments and give the book for print. So around 11-12 March, we will be starting a new 100% English batch for SAFL, our regular full course batch 130 hours. That will start approximately around 11 or 12 March in 100% English. The Hindi batch is already completed for May and September 26 exams. Right, ma'am. Power batch. We already have a power batch available on the website for Jan 26. You can continue it for May 26 also if you are in a hurry to complete the syllabus. Otherwise, specifically for May 26 and September 26, I am starting 100% English power batch, where in 60 hours, in an exam oriented super fast manner, we complete everything, important questions, all ABC topics, everything. It is not for first timers, right? If you're studying for first time, you should definitely go for shuffle batch. But if you have studied the concepts earlier, or let's say 1 year 2 year back, you were unable to clear, it is an attempt that you're giving again, you want to brush up the concepts, or ma'am, you just want to finish up full IDT with me, increase your confidence, gain achieve 80 plus marks in exam, then also you can opt for power batch. Hindi power batch has already started. 1-2 lectures are done also, and English power batch we will start approximately around 20 February. In 15 days we will wind up the full syllabus of IDT, where topic wise every concept, it is a lot more than revision videos, right? Revision videos on YouTube range just for like 15 to 20 hours, so it is 3 times detailed than the revision videos, in a fast track manner, where we are going to cover all the topics and plus some important question solving. So of course it is half of the regular batch. Regular batch is 130 and power is only 60 hours, but it is 3 times more than the revision video. It is just like the first revision that you do on your own after finishing the topic. Every concept detailed, covered in detail, all the loopholes closed, your confidence increased, how to write the answer, important question solving, all these things will be done in power batch, which starts from around 20 or 21 February after we finish up the Hindi power batch. Right, ma'am. So all the revision videos, power batch, shuffle batch, notes, question bank, amendment videos, amendment PDF, question bank PDF, planner for how to prepare for exam. Everything is shared from my side, available on Telegram. Please make sure that you are using all the resources to the fullest, preparing very well and getting the all India highest marks in IDT for me. See you all in some next sessions for revision lectures. Till then, all the best for exam. Give your all. Take care and bye-bye.